Let's talk about GameStop. I think it's important to call out that the folks on Reddit, which is obviously not on Robinhood, that identified the short squeeze opportunity ended up being right. And I think that gets lost in all of this, right? Is they basically identified this short squeeze opportunity. They went ahead, they exploited it. And for all intents and purposes, they applied quite a bit of pressure to a number of very large Wall Street firms. Some of that was on Robinhood, some of that was done elsewhere, but that's kind of a quick summary of the situation. When you think about that and you talk to somebody in private, it's like, how do you describe that situation? Was it something that you all saw pretty early on happening? Did it only really become the forefront once there was the pressure to the large firms? Like, just what is your recollection of like when you first became aware of that kind of whole situation that was transpiring?
Oh man, well, there's so much that happened in that time period, right? I mean, there was so many things going on, so it's hard to say where to start. I mean, you had basically, I was coming back home from the East Coast back to the West Coast in early January at the start of the new year. And typically at the start of the new year, you get an influx of people just generally interested in investing. So, people have New Year's resolutions. You have, people getting their year-end bonuses. So there's a lot of just natural kind of seasonal interest in investing at around that time. You also had sort of the remnants of the election and then the insurrection in January. And the pandemic was very much flaring up. So people were inside and dealing with sort of the peak cases and pandemic activity. So we were very much still locked down. And then I think people had gotten stimulus checks at the end of the previous year as well. So the confluence of all of these factors led to just Robinhood climbing through the App Store. We were first hitting sort of like number one in the financial category, and then eventually ended up actually number one overall, ahead of social media products like TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, which is pretty unprecedented for a financial product and a brokerage product. So, we were trying to keep everything together and, looking around corners best we could to make sure we were stable and up for customers. I remember at that time, that was my number one priority, because at the beginning of the pandemic, March of 2020, we had some downtime right as markets were getting super volatile. And that was very disappointing to me kind of as an engineer who built the product, right? You never want your service to be down for a significant period of time, especially, when there's a lot of market volatility. So that was kind of fresh in my mind, just making sure that the investments that we made on the technology were paying off. And, we were really being tested at that point with some growth that we hadn't seen in the past. And then, of course, we couldn't have anticipated the Five Sigma, the sort of 1 in 3.5 million event, which resulted on the week of January 28th, where basically the kind of viral social media activity all funneled through a handful of stocks and really a handful of brokerages, Robinhood kind of being the bulk of it, but also lots of other brokerages had to deal with similar things, both before we restricted the stocks and after. So the way I describe it is, the markets as they currently were set, were not really built for that type of activity. And you can kind of see a bunch of assumptions breaking. And that's what led Robinhood to restrict opening positions. And that's why many other brokerages did that as part of their risk mitigation procedures, one way or another, before and after our restrictions.
So most of the questions fall in three buckets around all this stuff. And there's a whole bunch of professionals, whether they're journalists, they're politicians, they're et cetera, that'll kind of do like the fact finding mission. So I'm going to leave it to them to do their jobs. Frankly, I don't think that stuff is as interesting as just kind of getting your perspective here. So the first thing is, what are, in hindsight, the things that you wish that you'd either done differently or that were like the lessons learned, right? So, hindsight bias is amazing. We get to sit here kind of safely on the other side of this for you and for Robinhood and say, okay, what would you have done differently, or what did you learn from that entire experience and kind of chaos?
Yeah, I mean, I think the straightforward one is just communicating with customers and letting them know, sort of like with more specificity, what could happen, what could not happen. We did communicate to customers actually quite prolifically, but I look back at some of those communications, and especially in the days leading up to January 28th, we would send information about market volatility and how to protect yourself, and information about long-term investing. And I think hindsight being 2020, we had no idea we would have to restrict these stocks up until the morning of January 28th. But, being a little bit upfront and preparing people for possibility, I think would have gone a long way. Just saying, hey, in addition to this information about what volatility means, this is what a brokerage could do in response to volatility, including, restricting these stocks. Probably would have tempered a little bit of kind of the conspiracy theories that emerged of the brokers colluding with the hedge funds, which despite all of our efforts, all of my efforts, still remain. People still out there think that Robinhood colluded with hedge funds, which is flabbergasting to me, even though all of the mountain of actual evidence I think pretty categorically explains that we had to impose these restrictions because we got a big collateral call from NSCC, which is completely has nothing to do with hedge funds whatsoever. But stemming that at the beginning as early as possible probably would have been a little bit more effective. But you yourself probably know it's very, very hard to stop the spread of misinformation on social media, and a simple lie is just more compelling than a complicated truth a lot of the times. And for some reason, it's like collusion is like the word of the decade. People love talking about collusion one way or another. If it's like, collusion with Russians for one election, collusion with someone else for another election, collusion with hedge funds, people like to think that, that's it's a very, very tempting narrative. And unfortunately, tempting narratives win the day in this age of social media. So I think there's a lot of things we could have done better, a lot of lessons. And a lot of things, we have done better since then, including communicating more transparently, really ramping up our customer support to make sure we're there for customers, and generally articulating our values a little bit better, telling people, hey, we are a safety first company. We believe in democratization. Absolutely. We want you to do everything that you want to do within the confines of sort of law and regulation, but we want to make sure that especially the young people and the first time investors on Robinhood are having a great experience, have great support, and have access to all the information they need to become long-term investors.